This audio recording includes subtitles, so you can follow along more intentionally and absorb the ideas at your own pace. Why is it that the person who barely looks your way can hold your attention for months, while the person who's genuinely interested in you can start to feel almost invisible within weeks? Why does distance feel like magnetism, and closeness sometimes feel like something to slowly lose interest in? You've probably lived this without fully understanding it. The one who texted back 3 days late somehow occupied more of your mind than the one who replied instantly and meant every word. And it turns out there's a reason for that, and it has almost nothing to do with who deserves your effort more. Most people don't chase the person who's right for them. They chase the feeling of almost having someone, and when that becomes the pattern, the very thing that feels like passion is often just an old wound asking to be resolved by someone who was never going to resolve it. So let's talk about why this happens, and more importantly, how to stop it. Because none of this is about being unlovable or making bad choices on purpose. It's a pattern that once made sense, and if you understand how it formed, you can finally stop running toward people who were never running toward you. When we're young, we learn what attention is worth by how hard we have to work to get it. If love, praise, or approval came easily and consistently, a child learns that connection is simply available, something you receive rather than something you earn through effort. But if attention was inconsistent, if warmth came and went unpredictably, if approval had to be worked for, performed for, or waited out through long stretches of distance, a very different lesson gets wired in early. Love is something you chase. Attention is something you prove yourself worthy of. And the moments that felt the most significant weren't the calm, steady ones. They were the moments right after distance, when attention finally returned, because that return felt like relief, like victory, like something you'd actually earned. And for a while, this understanding of connection works. It teaches you persistence. It teaches you to keep trying, even when things feel uncertain. It gives you a strange kind of hope that if you just try hard enough, distant people can eventually be won. But here's the hidden cost. When your nervous system learns that attention has to be chased to be real, calm, consistent affection stops registering as love at all. It starts to feel flat, almost suspicious, like something is missing simply because nothing needs to be won. Meanwhile, someone who's inconsistent, someone who pulls away and occasionally returns, lights up an old, familiar circuit that feels indistinguishable from genuine attraction. And over time, you internalize a very dangerous idea. If it comes easily, it probably isn't worth much. If I have to chase it, it must be valuable. And that belief will quietly sabotage every relationship you enter as an adult. Because the moment someone shows steady interest, some old part of you gets suspicious of how simple it feels. While the moment someone shows inconsistent interest, that same old part of you leans forward, convinced this is the one worth working for. So instead of questioning the pull toward emotional unavailability, you follow it because it feels like meaning, like importance, like the kind of love that actually requires something from you. And slowly your relationships start to organize themselves around a very specific pattern. You give the most energy to people who give the least back, because their scarcity feels like proof of value, and you quietly lose interest in people who are simply, consistently present, because their availability feels like proof of the opposite. You protect this pattern instead of ever testing what might happen if you let yourself want someone who wanted you back just as clearly. And that's the trap, because while you're pouring your energy into someone who keeps just enough distance to stay interesting, you're not actually building a relationship. You're managing a craving. And the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between genuine connection and the specific, addictive relief of finally getting a small amount of attention from someone who's been withholding it. At some point, if you're honest, you notice that the people you've chased hardest were rarely the ones who treated you the best. They were the ones who made you work the hardest to feel secure, even briefly. You can't afford to walk away from that chase, because some old part of you still believes that winning their attention would finally prove something you've been trying to prove your whole life. So you keep chasing. And that's when the exhaustion sets in. Not from loving too much, but from spending your energy on people who were never actually offering anything to receive it. There's a reason this cycle repeats itself so precisely. The pull you feel towards someone distant isn't really about them. It's about an old, unfinished attempt to finally earn steady love from someone who once withheld it, and some deep, wordless part of you keeps casting new people into that same familiar role, hoping that if you just try a little harder this time, the outcome will finally be different. It won't. Not because you're not enough, but because the person in front of you was never actually the source of the original wound. They're simply the latest person wearing its shape, and no amount of effort directed at them will resolve something that happened somewhere else, a long time ago. Because real change here requires noticing the pattern itself, not just analyzing each person you've chased individually. Think about it. If you look honestly at who you've pursued hardest, you'll likely find a consistent emotional role you keep casting people into. The withholding one, the almost available one, the one who makes you prove yourself before they'll fully show up. And if you keep interpreting the intensity of your longing as evidence of how right someone is for you, you miss the exact information that would show you the pattern clearly. You mistake their inconsistency for depth. You mistake their distance for mystery. You interpret the anxiety of not knowing where you stand as a sign that this relationship matters more than the ones that felt simple. And without realizing it, you keep confirming the same old story instead of questioning why it feels so familiar in the first place. But you still want love to work, right? So what do? You lean on what you know. Effort. You try to win consistent affection from someone who's fundamentally inconsistent, believing that enough patience, enough understanding, enough proof of your worth will eventually change the outcome. And this leads to something we could call the intermittent reward trap, where occasional, unpredictable attention becomes more compelling than steady attention ever could, because your mind starts treating each small return of interest as a victory worth chasing again. It works, up to a point, in the sense that it keeps you hooked, but underneath, you're depleted, because instead of receiving love, you're constantly performing for the possibility of it. So now even hope starts to feel like exhaustion, because each small return of attention resets the whole cycle instead of ever resolving it. But you're perceptive, right? You should be able to see this pattern clearly and stop it. So you try to reason your way out. You tell yourself you'll recognize it next time. You promise yourself you won't chase someone distant again. None of it fully works, because the pull isn't purely intellectual. It's stored somewhere deeper, in a felt sense of what attention is supposed to cost, and no amount of insight fully overrides a nervous system trained since childhood to treat scarcity as significance. There's no promise clever enough to answer the real question underneath it all. Can I actually let myself want someone who doesn't require chasing? That question can only be answered by staying near someone consistent long enough for it to stop feeling unfamiliar, not by understanding the pattern from a safe intellectual distance. And when the exhaustion from this cycle becomes too sharp, when you notice how tired you are of running after people who never quite arrive, that's when a final defense kicks in. You tell yourself, I just have a type. I'm just drawn to people who are hard to read. And now, instead of admitting you're unconsciously repeating an old attempt to earn love that was withheld, you convince yourself this is simply your preference, your taste, your fate, not because you fully believe that, but because it hurts less than admitting how much of your love life has been shaped by a pattern you never consciously agreed to. So how do we fix this? The first step, and this is non-negotiable, is that you have to stop treating the intensity of your longing as proof that someone is right for you. Not because effort in relationships doesn't matter, but because for a lot of people, the strongest pull is simply the loudest signal of an old, unresolved wound calling itself attraction. When your nervous system equates love with scarcity, you will keep mistaking distance for depth until you deliberately retrain what your body has learned to associate with being wanted. So the fix is to notice the specific feeling of chasing and treat it as a warning rather than a compliment to the person causing it. You stop asking, how do I get this person to finally choose me? And you start asking, why do I only feel this pull toward people who make me work for basic consistency? You stop interpreting distance as mystery and start noticing when steady, uncomplicated interest makes you strangely uneasy, because that unease is information, not a sign that something's missing. You let yourself sit with a few unfamiliar weeks of being chosen easily, without needing to win it, before deciding it's boring. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It can feel oddly flat at first, like waiting for the difficulty that never comes. But it's not a step backward, because it's the first real step toward wanting people who actually want you back, instead of people who make wanting them a full-time occupation. Being human means you're allowed to want something calmer than what you've always chased. You're allowed to feel unsettled by ease, while your nervous system slowly relearns what safety is supposed to feel like. But the only way forward is to practice choosing presence over pursuit, in small, repeated moments. Not in one dramatic decision to swear off chasing forever. Not instant comfort with something unfamiliar. Just small, repeated choices toward people who show up without needing to be caught, until your body finally learns that this too can be what wanting someone feels like. So if you're someone who keeps running after people who stay just out of reach, who feels more alive in the chase than in the actual having, if you've spent your whole life mistaking scarcity for significance, this is where you begin. You let go of the finish line you were never going to reach. You stop chasing the feeling of almost. You start noticing who's already standing still, waiting to be chosen, right in front of you. Because you don't need to keep proving your worth to someone who's already decided not to fully show up. You just need to be someone who's willing to let ease feel unfamiliar for a while, until it finally starts to feel like what it actually is: safety. And if you can do that, if you can stop chasing and start receiving, you'll start to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Being chosen, not because you finally earned it through enough effort, but because you finally stopped needing to. If any part of this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, leave a comment and let me know what stood out. Chances are, you're not the only one who feels this way, and sometimes naming the pattern is the first real step to breaking it. Thanks for listening to episodes of Kynn. Take care of your mind, and I'll see you in the next episode.